All of us have seen abandoned buildings, but have you ever had the courage to explore one? As it turns out, they're not always abandoned after all. Here are some chilling urban exploration stories. This is going to be a rather lengthy story, so please bear with me, guys. Back when I was in my early to mid-teens, around 2007-2008, me and a bunch of friends would regularly hang out at an old abandoned school. A very small school with only 8 classrooms, a teacher's room, a cafeteria, 2 bathrooms, and one room we had no idea what was in it since it was always locked. But I'll get back to that later. This school hadn't been able to keep up with the 80s modernization of our town and the large number of newcomers that followed with it. And as such, it quickly closed down in favor of new schools and buildings by the end of the 80s. Most of the place was boarded up completely, but you could enter through a window in one of the classrooms, where the board had been ripped down. Our routine was always the same. Whoever of us got off school first would go down to the building and go through the different rooms to make sure everything was empty and safe, as these buildings had earlier been known as the spot for local drug addicts, and used needles and such was a common sight for us by this point. So this one day, me and a friend of mine were the first to get out of school, and as per usual, we take the walk down to the building. But upon entering and stepping out from the classroom and into the hallway, we immediately see a large man. I remember him as quite huge, but that might possibly be how he appeared to us as kids. And my friend lets out a huge scream. The man doesn't appear shocked or scared, and he doesn't seem to react to us, but he turns to look at us, and then he asks, "Have you guys seen..." Insert my friend's name here. We tell the guy that we haven't seen anyone and only just got there, to which he sighs and shrugs and then pushes past us to leave the same way we just entered. Now, our friend has an unusual name, so the chances that this guy was just looking for another random guy who just happened to have the same name were pretty low, but none of us had ever seen this guy before. And I happen to know most of my said friend's family as well. When we described what the guy looked like to our friend, he didn't seem to know who this guy could have been either. And for the next few months, we were too scared to go back. When we did return, about 3 to 4 months later, it was in the middle of summer vacation, and we thought it would be fun to climb up on the roof of the building and sunbathe. Upon climbing it, we found the roof to be rather weak and close to caving in, but something made us take the risk and dare to venture out on the roof. After all, a hole in the roof, which we figured would have to be directly above the room we had never been in. The hole in the roof was only about the size of a football, and one of my friends came up with the idea to lower her arm down into the hole and film the room using her phone so that we could all see what the room looked like. She puts her arm down, and as she is filming, she suddenly lets out a blood-curdling scream and immediately retracts her arm. But her phone is no longer to be seen. She was certain that something had knocked it from her hand, and as we looked down through the hole, we could see her phone laying on the floor. We climbed down from the roof and entered the building, now intent on doing whatever it would take to get in the room, so our friend wouldn't have to return home without a phone and have to explain what happened. About 30 minutes later, we finally managed to make a hole in the door and put our hands inside, and when we tried to use the door handle on the inside of the door now opens without any trouble. We step inside, and we all stare in silence. To this day, I have no idea what this room was doing in a school building, and I sincerely hope it has never been used for what it looked like it was intended for. The room is about 4 by 4 meters, and the floor and walls are all made of solid concrete. In the left corner of the room, from where we entered, was 2 metal bowls sitting on the floor, and at the back of the room was 5 chains dangling from the wall, 4 with equal-sized cuffs, and 1 large that looked like it would fit around a neck. Needless to say, we swiftly picked up my friend's phone and immediately left the place. However, the room had us both scared, but also slightly intrigued. So after some talk back and forth that same night, we decided to go back to look at it again the following day. When we returned the next day, we found the door to be locked once again, and someone had covered the hole we made in the door with a large wooden board nailed on the door. Once again, we immediately left, and after that visit, we never returned. I have no idea what we stumbled upon that day, but I am certain my days hanging out at this place is what sparked my interest in abandoned places. Today, I am an experienced member of the Urbex community, and I've had much more sinister experiences with places like this that I might share with y'all some other time. Since taking up Urbex, it has been a dream of mine to go back to that school and check if that room was still there. But unfortunately, the place no longer exists, and the area is now home to a thrift store. Hey guys, so after hearing about some of the threads up on here about scary or unexplainable stories that dot Reddit, I thought I would throw up a couple of my own. As an intro, I go by the name Holt, and I am an urban explorer living in Virginia. I got into urban exploration, or Urbex, just because I loved the thrill of exploring places long since abandoned. But within that time, I have tended to come across rather terrifying experiences. Depending on what kind of feedback I get, I'll see if you guys would like to hear any more. But for now, I'll throw up this one. One of my first experiences with the weirder and creepier side of Urbex was when I first started back in 2014. About 2 counties over from where I live, there's a mental institution called Central State Hospital. Being on the older side of this county, remnants of the previous buildings from 1926 are still standing. From the historical documents and records that I uncovered while doing some research, Central State Hospital was built following the Civil War to aid in relief efforts for recently freed black slaves. But as time went on, the facility became one of its first in the South to offer mental hospitalization for black patients. The new building is now built right next to the old one. So after some digging, snooping, and spying, I finally worked up the gumption to break in and explore. Armed with a flashlight and a mounting curiosity and a pry bar, I pulled back one of the boarded up windows and crawled in. Not knowing what to expect, I began to wander the dark and creepy hallways of the old hospital, checking each room for anything interesting. The facility is basically one large square with 4-story corners, most likely offices, 2-story corridors, and a now heavily wooded courtyard. Where I got in was the east front corner. I wandered most of the corridors until I found a stairwell leading downstairs. On the sublevel, there was a long corridor that held the autopsy room, morgue, and furnace room. Now, after an hour or so of looking around, reading old documents, and noticing some suspicious drug paraphernalia, I decided to make my way out, seeing as how it was going on midnight. As I turned around to leave, I noticed that the street security light that you could see from the bottom of the stairs was now absent. To my absolute horror, a massive black figure, about 8 feet tall, stood at the top of the stairwell. Now, being the 6'7" bruiser that I was, I did the most logical thing any man would do. I screamed like the little bitch I was. Up the stairs, through the figure, out the pried open window, and into the loving arms of Petersburg's finest. Slapped with a potential trespassing charge and sitting in the back of a police cruiser, I was questioned about the screaming, When I told the officer what I had seen, he turned about as white as a sheet. Apparently, since he and his partner started doing rounds on the property, they had constantly seen apparitions all along the opened windows at the top floors. Needless to say, I got off with a slap on the wrist and a no more kind of deal. Let me know if you guys want to hear more. One day, me and my friend wanted to go exploring around the surrounding parts of my neighborhood. We lived in a suburban town in western Pennsylvania, and nothing really bad happens around here. I was around 16 at the time of this event, and remember it vividly. So, on this day, we heard about an abandoned house right across the highway that has been deserted for years. Being young and adventurous at the time, my friend and I were excited to check out this place. We rode our bikes to where the house was located. The house was semi-covered by overgrown trees and vines, and the house was an eerie gray color. We parked our bikes behind the house to where the backyard was, so we wouldn't be seen by any neighbors. This house was surrounded by 4 other houses that were being lived in. The back door was cracked open already, so we didn't have to break anything open to get inside. Right as we walked through the back door, we were welcomed to the kitchen, which was destroyed by water damage and mold. Luckily, we brought masks and gloves to protect us from the smell and everything we touch in this home. Miscellaneous items were scattered everywhere across the floor and down the hall, which leads to the front door. This house is a 2-story house with an unfinished basement and looks like it was built in the mid-1900s. One thing I noticed when walking through the first floor was that lots of the furniture and decor were still present in the house, which was odd. It seems like whoever lived here has completely left everything the way it used to be, other than probably a few things because the interior of the house was still decently bare. We found an old record player, a few old video game consoles with those massive joysticks you use, and lots of old books. These were the items we found just scattered across the first floor hallway. We haven't even gone upstairs yet. There was a narrow wooden staircase that led up to the second floor. When walking up it, the silence was broken by the overwhelming sound of the creaking of the stairs. At the top, there are 2 rooms on either side of the stairs, each almost identical and symmetrical to each other. My friend and I decided to enter the left room first to see what's inside. The first thing I saw when entering was a massive gloss black piano in the middle of the floor. I was not sure why there was a piano upstairs and not on the first floor, but it was cool, but ominous to see this. The thick carpet the piano sat on was a dark red color. Everything in this room was scattered across the floor as well. Most of the items were kids' toys and magazines, so I assumed that a whole family used to live here. Also, the one window that faces the backyard, where we left our bikes, was open when we walked in. This was odd, but not surprising. The entire time here, I just had a gut feeling that we weren't alone, even though we have at least glanced into every room, and this house has been on sale since 2006. It was 2017 at the time. This is where things escalated almost immediately. My friend was searching through the bookshelves across the room while I was looking at the piano. I wanted to lighten things up since we both felt slightly uneasy being here due to the state of the house. So I wanted to play a tune on the piano. I play a few notes to some random songs that I don't remember, but I was interrupted by a loud crash coming from downstairs. It sounded like something from the basement, which the staircase to it was right below the staircase to the second floor, if you can picture what I mean by that. We both stood silently looking at each other in disbelief, until moments later, we hear loud stomping running down the hallway on the first floor, coming towards the second floor staircase. Whatever this was, sounded like it had big boots on, and the whole house shook after each foot smashed into the floor as it ran through the hallway. There were no voices, or screaming coming from whatever this was. It was just running after us. We heard it continue to run at full speed through the house and up the creaky stairs. My friend and I were freaking out and had to make a decision fast. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't stopping at all on its way up to us. We remembered that the window next to us was open, so our only solution to getting out safely was to jump out the window. From the moment I started playing the piano to when we jumped out the window after hearing someone chasing us happened within mere seconds. Luckily, our bikes were right below where we jumped out, and all I could think about was getting out and across the highway as fast as possible. I got slightly hurt after jumping out the second-story window, but my adrenaline was through the roof and wasn't thinking about it at that moment. My friend was right behind me the whole time. Thankfully, we both got on our bikes and left. I was shaken to tears the whole ride back home. To this day, I still have no idea what was in this house that chased us. We never heard the back or front door open, and everything in this house creaks, so we would have heard it. This was in the house the entire time we were there, and I don't know how we didn't see anything. I have a great feeling that this wasn't human, but who knows? I will never forget this day, ever. Edit. Forgot to mention that I went back years later and found a barn way back in the woods. Seeing a barn in the middle of the woods would freak anybody out a little. Luckily, I didn't experience any activity this time. I only went in the barn because the house ended up being boarded up, and I'm concerned why that happened and who did it. The barn had a massive turkey vulture nest under the stairwell, and it was really freaky. They circled the house and barn from above constantly, and I got real close to some of them. Below are a couple images of the house and barn. Haven't actually taken photos of the house, but I found one where it's in the background.